$50 bill. That's what my son handed me at his wedding reception. A crisp 50, tucked inside a grocery store card. The kind with a generic "Congratulations" printed in gold cursive. He'd folded it once, like an afterthought, like something he grabbed from his wallet on the way to the venue because he suddenly remembered he probably should give his father something. I stood there holding it while the ballroom filled with music and laughter, and I thought about the $214,000. Not all at once. It came to me in pieces, the way it always does when you try not to think about something. The $47,000 down payment I wired to his bank account 6 years ago so he and his wife could buy their first house. The $18,000 I paid directly to the hospital when his wife needed surgery and their insurance had a gap. The $31,000 I gave him in cash over 7 years. Here's $3,000, son. I heard business is slow. Here's $5,000. Don't worry about paying it back. The car, the tuition he never quite finished. The $22,000 I spent on his business that folded in 18 months. $214,000. And a $50 card. I know how this sounds. I know a father isn't supposed to count what he's given his child. My own father told me once, "You give to your kids because you love them, not to keep a ledger." I believed that for 62 years. I believed it right up until the moment my son's new father-in-law stood up during the reception toast, and my son looked at that man with more warmth and admiration in his eyes than I had seen directed at me in 10 years. My name is Harold. I'm 64 years old. I drove a city bus for 31 years. I want to be very clear about that. 31 years of 4:45 a.m. alarms, 31 years of sitting behind that wheel in August heat and January ice, learning every pothole on Route 7, watching the city change around me through that big windshield. I wasn't an executive. I wasn't building anything impressive. I was a man doing an honest job. And for the last 11 of those years, I worked a second shift 3 nights a week as a security guard at a pharmaceutical warehouse on the east side. I slept 4 hours some nights. My back has never been right since 2019. My wife, Patrice, passed away 9 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, caught too late. We'd been married 36 years. She was a school cafeteria worker. She fed other people's children their lunches and came home smelling like tater tots, and I loved her completely. When she got sick, I didn't hesitate. I sold our house in Decatur, the house we'd bought in 1989 for $94,000 and paid off over 20 years. I sold it for $187,000, and I used most of that money for her treatment, for the specialists, for the clinical trial that ultimately didn't work, but that we had to try. She died on a Thursday morning in February. My son was 26. He cried at the funeral and I held him. And then life moved on the way life does. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. I kept working. I gave my son money when he needed it, and he needed it often, and I never made him feel bad about asking. That was the deal I'd made with myself. I would not be the father who withheld. I would not be the father my own father had been, tight-fisted and proud of it. If I had it and my son needed it, he got it. He married his wife 3 years ago. She is fine. She is perfectly fine. She is perfectly fine. I have no problem with her as a person. But her family is wealthy in a way that my family never was. Her father owns 4 auto dealerships in the Atlanta metro area, drives a different vehicle every month, has a vacation home in Hilton Head. When my son entered that world, something shifted. I noticed it. But I told myself I was being sensitive. Fathers get jealous of in-laws sometimes. That's normal. That's just pride getting in the way. I talked myself out of what I was seeing for almost 2 years. Then came the wedding. My son and his wife had a beautiful wedding. 300 guests, a venue outside Alpharetta, late September when the weather is perfect in Georgia. I wore the navy suit I'd bought for Patrice's cousin's retirement party. I pressed it myself the night before. I got there early and I sat in the 3rd row because my son had not designated a specific seat for me, and I thought 3rd row was respectful without being presumptuous. The ceremony was lovely. I cried a little when he said his vows. I'm not ashamed of that. The reception is where everything happened. My son's father-in-law. I'll call him what he was to me at that point, which is a stranger with money, stood up during the first round of toasts and announced that his wedding gift to the couple was a fully paid 2-week honeymoon to Italy, including business-class flights, a private villa in Tuscany for the first week, and a hotel suite in Rome for the second. He said it like a man who does this kind of thing regularly, who gives Italy the way other people give blenders. The room applauded. My son's wife started crying. My son stood up and hugged the man for a long time, patting his back, laughing, shaking his head like he couldn't believe his luck. I watched my son's face during that hug. I had not seen that face in a long time. When it was my turn to give a toast, I kept it short. I said I loved my son. I said I was proud of the man he'd become. I said I wished his mother could have been there. A few people at my table patted my arm when I sat back down. My son nodded at me from across the room. That was our moment. Later, during dinner, he came over briefly. He slid the card across the table without sitting down, said, "Hey Dad, this is for you." And then someone called his name from across the room and he was gone. I opened the card. I read the generic gold cursive. I unfolded the 50. I sat with it in my hand for a moment. Then I put it in my breast pocket, next to my heart, because I needed to feel it there so I could be certain I wasn't misreading the situation, so I could be certain this was real. I spent the rest of the reception at my table. I ate the chicken. I watched my son dance with his father-in-law, both of them laughing at something. The older man's hand on my son's shoulder in a way that looked practiced, comfortable, like they'd been doing it for years. I watched my daughter-in-law float through the room in her dress, radiant and happy, stopping at every table. She came to mine, hugged me, told me she was so glad I was there. I told her she looked beautiful. She does. That part was easy. I drove home alone at 11 o'clock, an hour and 20 minutes on I-20, the Atlanta suburbs slipping past me in the dark. I did not cry on the way home. I was too busy thinking. I had a yellow legal pad in my kitchen. I'd always been a person who wrote things down, kept records, old habit from years of union paperwork and shift logs. I sat down at my kitchen table at 12:30 in the morning and I started writing, not angrily, carefully, methodically. I opened the drawer where I kept my financial files. I am the kind of man who keeps every bank statement, every wire transfer confirmation, every check stub, and I began going through them. It took me until 2:30 in the morning. The total, including everything I could document and a conservative estimate of the cash I'd given him over the years that I hadn't formally recorded, was $214,000, give or take. I underlined it twice. Then I sat there in my quiet apartment and I asked myself an honest question. Is this about the money? The answer, when I was truly honest, was no. It was never about the money. I knew when I gave it that I wasn't making an investment. I wasn't buying love or gratitude or a specific kind of attention at a wedding reception. I gave it because he was my son and he needed it. And that's what fathers do. But here's what I also knew. Sitting at that table at 2:30 in the morning, my son had looked at that man. That perfectly pleasant stranger with 4 car dealerships. The way I had been hoping my son would look at me for at least a decade. With admiration, with genuine warmth, with the specific softness that a person reserves for someone they feel they owe something to, or better yet, someone they simply love without complication. I had stopped being that person to my son somewhere along the way, and I'd kept giving him money anyway, like I was trying to buy my way back in, and the money had never once changed the way he looked at me. I am 64 years old. I am not a wealthy man. What I have left, after 31 years of driving, after selling the house, after paying for treatments and down payments and surgeries, is my pension, my Social Security, when I'm old enough to collect it fully, a modest retirement account, and approximately $340,000 in assets, including my current savings and the small rental property I bought in 2021 as a retirement strategy. The rental property is worth about $195,000. The savings account has $91,000. The retirement account has $91,000. The retirement account has another $54,000. It's not a fortune, but it's what I built, and I had until that night fully intended to leave all of it to my son. I have a will. I made it in 2018 after a health scare that turned out to be nothing but reminded me I wasn't invincible. At the time, I named my son as the sole beneficiary of everything. It seemed obvious. He was my only child. He was my blood. That's what you do. I did not update that will after the wedding. I went to bed and I slept 6 hours and I went to church on Sunday and I came home and I cooked a small meal and I did not make any decisions. I am not a man who makes permanent decisions when I'm hurt. My father taught me that much. But I started asking around, quietly. I have a friend named Chester who retired from the city the same year I did. He worked in the permits office for 30 years and his daughter is a paralegal. I asked Chester if his daughter could recommend a good estate attorney. He didn't ask why. Good friends never ask why. 3 weeks after the wedding, I sat in the office of an estate attorney named Patricia Webb on a Tuesday afternoon. I told her what I had. I told her what I wanted to do. She listened without judgment, asked precise questions, and then explained my options clearly. In the state of Georgia, I can do exactly what I want with my estate. There is no forced heirship for adult children here. My son has no legal claim to anything I haven't already given him. We spent about an hour and a half together. When I left her office, I had a plan. I want to explain something about those months between the wedding and what came next. I did not cut off contact with my son. I did not become cold or distant in a way he would have noticed. I came to Thanksgiving dinner at his house. I brought sweet potato pie. Patrice's recipe, the one he'd grown up eating. I sat at the table and I talked to his wife's parents and I admired their stories about Hilton Head. And I was pleasant. My son and I watched football afterward and it was fine. It was the specific kind of fine that exists when two people have an unspoken distance between them, but neither one has named it yet. He called me on my birthday in January. He texted more than he called. He's that generation. The texts were warm enough. How you doing, Dad? Thinking about you. We should get together soon. The getting together soon never happened, but I didn't push it. I haven't pushed anything in years. What I was doing during those months was watching clearly for the first time, paying attention without the fog of hope and denial I'd been walking through. And what I saw was this. My son was not a bad person. He was not cruel. He was not the villain of this story, and I want to be careful about that, because it matters to me. He was a man who had grown up with a father who provided everything materially and was perhaps not always present in the ways that are harder to measure. I drove a bus. I worked security. I was tired a lot. I gave him money, partly because money was easier for me to give than time and attention, and I think some part of me knew that even when I was doing it. But knowing that, understanding that, carrying some of the responsibility for it, none of that obligated me to give him $340,000 after I was gone. Those are two different things. I finalized the new will in March. Here's what I decided. The rental property goes to a trust I'm setting up for my 2 grandchildren, my son's kids, ages 4 and 7. It will pay for their college education and become available to them when they turn 25. They didn't choose their father. They don't deserve to lose anything because of choices made by the adults around them, and I love those children more than I can adequately describe in a document like this. The oldest one calls me Pop Pop and draws me pictures of buses because she knows I used to drive one. I have a collection of those drawings on my refrigerator. My retirement account, the $54,000, goes to my church's scholarship fund. I talked to the pastor about it. He was moved. I didn't tell him why. My savings account, $91,000. I am spending on myself while I still can. I bought a used but beautiful RV in April. I have already driven it to the Smoky Mountains, to New Orleans, to a campsite outside of Sedona, Arizona, where I sat in a folding chair and watched the sun set behind red rock formations. And I thought about Patrice and I talked to her out loud and I cried, finally. All the crying I hadn't done on I-20 that night after the wedding. It felt like something loosening. I didn't tell my son about any of this. He found out about the will in August, 8 months after the wedding, when he mentioned in passing during a phone call that he'd been thinking about the future and asked casually what my plans were. I think he expected the usual answer, the one where I tell him not to worry. Everything will be taken care of. Instead, I told him, calmly, that I had updated my estate plan, and he was no longer the primary beneficiary. I told him the rental property was going to his children's education trust. I told him the rest was being handled in ways I felt good about. There was a long silence. Then, "What do you mean you updated your will?" I explained it again. Same words, the same calm. I'm a man who has spent 31 years dealing with difficult situations behind a steering wheel. You learn to keep your voice level. He called me 11 times over the next 3 days. On the 4th day, he drove to my apartment without calling first. I let him in. I made coffee. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd sat with the yellow legal pad at 2:30 in the morning, and he asked me why. I told him about the wedding. Not in an accusatory way. I told it the way I've told it here, with the facts. The $50. The $214,000. The hug that lasted longer than any hug he'd given me in years. He told me I was being unfair. He said the money had always been freely given. He said he hadn't known how much it totaled. He said his father-in-law's gift was just more visible, because it happened in public, and that wasn't a fair comparison. He said a lot of things that were partially true. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Son, I'm not angry with you. I don't need you to apologize. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I finally understood something at your wedding that I had been refusing to understand for years, that I had been giving you money instead of having a relationship with you, and the money hadn't built one. And at my age, I'd rather spend what I have left on something real." He stared at me. I said, "I'd like to have dinner with you once a month. I'd like to take the grandkids to the park when I'm in town and not be in a rush. I'd like to know what's actually going on in your life. If you want that too, I'm here for it. That's all I want." He left without finishing his coffee. I don't know what happens next. I've stopped pretending I can control it. He texted me 2 weeks later. Short, polite, not warm. I texted back. We are in some kind of early negotiation, the two of us, feeling around the edges of something that might become different or might not. Last month, I drove the RV to visit his family for a long weekend. I slept in the driveway in the RV rather than in their guest room because I wanted the option of my own space. And my son looked at me strange for it but didn't say anything. I took the grandkids to a local park both mornings. The older one held my hand the whole way there. The younger one fell asleep on my chest during the walk back, and I stood in the driveway for 20 minutes rather than put him down, just breathing, just being still. My son came outside at one point and saw me standing there with the boy asleep on my chest. He looked at us for a moment. Something moved across his face that I couldn't fully read. He went back inside. He came back out with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. He didn't say anything, and I didn't either. And we stood there together in the morning quiet while the coffee went warm in my hands, and my grandson breathed steadily against my chest. That's where we are. I have no dramatic ending to give you. I did not get an apology. I did not get a grand reconciliation. I got a cup of coffee, handed to me in silence by a man I have loved since the moment he was born, and will love until I cannot love anything anymore. The $50 card is in my desk drawer. I kept it. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it reminds me of the moment I finally stopped pretending. And whatever comes next, whether my son and I find our way back to each other or we don't, that moment was honest. The most honest thing that had happened between us in years. My pension is enough to live on. The RV is paid for. The grandchildren will go to college. I don't regret any of it. I think about that morning in the driveway sometimes. The coffee and the quiet, and I think maybe that $50 bought me something after all. Not what my son intended, but something. I've been thinking lately about what it actually costs a person to keep pretending. Not money. I know about money costs better than most. I mean the other kind. The cost of waking up every morning and deciding again to look away from something true. I did that for years. I told myself I was being a good father. I told myself the giving was unconditional, that I expected nothing back, that a man who keeps score isn't a man worth respecting. And there was truth in all of it. But there was also something else underneath. A quiet, persistent hope that if I gave enough, consistently enough, for long enough, my son would one day look at me the way I needed him to look at me. He never did, and the moment I finally saw that clearly, standing in a ballroom in Alpharetta holding a $50 card while the room applauded for someone else, something in me that had been wound very tight for a very long time finally went still. What I've come to understand is that giving without honesty isn't generosity. It's avoidance. I was avoiding the harder conversation, the one where I admitted that money had become the language I used with my son because I didn't know how to speak the other ones. I didn't know how to say, "I'm tired, and I miss you, and I feel like a stranger to you, and I don't understand when that happened." So I wired money instead, and he accepted it, and we both pretended the transaction was love. Because it was easier than the truth. The consequences of that, for both of us, were not sudden. They accumulated the way real things do, quietly, over years, until the ballroom and the $50 in his face during that hug made them impossible to ignore. That's how cause and effect actually works in a life. It rarely announces itself. It just builds and builds. And then one night you're sitting at your kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning with a yellow legal pad and you finally see the whole shape of what you made together. I'm not proud of everything in this story. I made mistakes as a father. I was absent in the ways that are harder to see than a missed birthday. Absent in attention, in patience, in the kind of presence that can't be purchased. Patrice used to tell me I solved problems with my wallet when I should have solved them with my time. She was right. She was usually right. What I am proud of is this. When I finally understood what had happened, I didn't collapse into bitterness. I didn't punish my son out of anger. I made a clear-eyed decision about what I actually wanted the rest of my life to look like, for the grandchildren, for myself, and yes, still for him. The door I left open was small. A monthly dinner. A walk to the park. A cup of coffee in a driveway in silence. But I left it open. That cup of coffee my son brought out that morning, he didn't have to do that. Nobody asked him to, and I've turned that small moment over in my mind many times since, because I think it might be the most honest thing that has passed between us in years. No transaction, no expectation. Just a man standing next to his father in the morning, quiet, handing him something warm. I don't know if that's the beginning of something or just a moment that stands alone. But I know it felt more like what I was always looking for than any wire transfer I ever sent. Harold is still figuring it out. So is his son. That seems about right.